Let's take a look at the world with a critical eye.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Inquiry Lab. Today, we're going to talk about critical thinking. Before we dive in too deep, I'm going to give 3 definitions, one for the academics, one for the doers, and one for everybody else. If you'd like to visit my website, please go to www.lucidinquiry.com. You can see my portfolio there, my background, links to other videos, and you can hire me to solve a problem if you'd like. So let's go ahead and dive into critical thinking. So here we have our formal definition of critical thinking. It is the disciplined process of analyzing arguments, identifying assumptions, and evaluating reasoning to reach logically sound, evidence-based conclusions. And here's a more functional definition of critical thinking. It's the skill of cutting through noise, clarifying ambiguity, questioning what others overlook, and structuring thought so decisions aren't built on illusion. And here's our very straightforward, plain term definition of critical thinking. It means not letting BS or nonsense slip by just because it sounds good. It's about seeing clearly when everybody else is guessing. So let's go ahead and have a look at a real-world case of where critical thinking comes in. When you're buying your cereal at the store, you might see 3 different size boxes. Advertisers certainly take advantage of this sort of thing, and the prices that they have on the box may not be associated with how good of a deal you're actually getting. It might say, value size or something like that, but there's not really a definition of what value size means. So what you really want to look at is the price per unit. So to see whether you're getting the best deal or not, look for the price per unit. In many states, including mine, there's a law that they have to put the price per unit on the shelf so that you can determine this. So it's always important to look very closely at the price per unit. So let's go ahead and look at a real clear-cut example of this. And this is the sort of thing that you're going to see in the real world. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about looking at things carefully and any ambiguity or sales pitch or how things appear that they are as opposed to how they really are. So let's go ahead and look here closely. We can see we've got a sign on the one on the right that says, "Big sale, get it while it lasts. 10 bars of soap for $10. I've got this appearing like it's a great deal, but you could look on the shelf to the left and you could see that the individual bars are 99 cents, which if you were to buy 10 of those is going to come to $9.90. So the one on the right has a sign on it and looks fancy, but it's not actually cheaper than buying them individually. And these sorts of things are rampant all over the place. The way that people advertise things and the way that they represent them does not necessarily represent reality. So this is what we are looking for when we're talking about critical thinking. And you can imagine if you had a more extensive version of this where you were talking about several steps in a business transaction or something like that, this is where they would be making all sorts of money off of you, is if you weren't looking at the breakdown of what you were actually paying for. If you wanted to buy 50 boxes of the bar of soap, the boxed version here that says big sale, imagine how much more you'd be paying than you would if you had bought them individually. So these are the sorts of real-world things that you want to look for. And of course, it gets much more complicated than this if you're talking about financing something or something that's got more variables involved. Okay, we're going to do a slightly more advanced example here with Francine the Cat. And we're going to imagine that Francine can go down one of 4 paths, one going back and to the left, one going back and to the right, one going forward and to the left, and one going forward to the right. And what Francine wants to do is gather the largest amount of kibble that she can, but she can only go down one path because she has limited energy. So we're going to go ahead and have a look at this in Excel, and I'm going to explain the problem a little bit further. Okay, so here we have Francine, and to start with, we're just going to look at the path that goes back into the left here and back into the right. And each one of these cells represents a little pad that Francine can jump on, and each one has whatever amount of kibble is listed in the cell. So this one has 1 piece of kibble, 2 pieces of kibble, 3 pieces of kibble, so on. And this side, each one just has 1 piece of kibble. So if we were just looking at this, we would look at this and we'd say, well, what path should Francine go down if she wants to gather the maximum number of pieces of kibble? So we can see here, we're not even going to use Excel to calculate this. We can see here that each one of these is 1, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cells. So that's going to equal 10 pieces of kibble. And over here, we can see that there are 10 plus 9, that's 19, plus 8 is 27, plus 7 more is 34, plus 6 is 40, 45, 49, 52, 54, 55. So here we have 55 pieces of kibble. So Francine would want to go down this path that is in the back left to gather the most amount of kibble. So this one is a pretty straightforward example that you can see what the answer is without even calculating anything, just by what is in the cells. So next we're going to make it a little bit more complicated. Okay, so let's make the problem slightly more complicated. And what we're going to imagine here is that in this case, the kibble can be broken up into quarter-sized chunks when necessary, and that when Francine lands on certain pads, she actually drops some pieces of kibble because it's slippery or some other reason like that. And so the point here isn't so much to be doing a math problem, it's to be looking at these as you would before you add anything up and think, I mean, you can see that this one here is not going to be the optimal path without even adding anything up compared to this side. But what about this one? Is this greater than 55 or less than 55? And adding this one up in your head is more difficult than this one here. And so the point really is to realize that when you're seeing data, you actually do have to add things up and see what the number is. You know, a salesperson might say something like, hey, look at this 18 and a 25 and 15 here. You don't see any of those big numbers over here, do you? And so ignoring that is what you need to do, and you need to actually figure out what the number is to see what the optimum path is. And if one were to be lazy and not want to do the math and those sorts of things, then you may end up with the worst deal when you could have figured it out. So let's look at this. We're going to use Excel. And what we can see over here is that it only adds up to 54.5 pieces of kibble. So it is not the optimum path for Francine to go down to gather the optimal number of kibble. So once again, the point here isn't so much math problems. It's that when you look at these sorts of things, these could be presented to you in different ways. And advertisers and salespeople and all sorts of people play all sorts of little tricks about how they come up with these things to get the better deal for themselves. I mean, even when they tell you that there's a price on something, the price that they're talking about, and they tell you there's a sale on it, the price that they're talking about is a price they came up with to begin with. So the sale, it's all an internal thing that you need to be looking at. And so it's always best to look at the real numbers. And that's why in a case like with a sale, you'd want to look at, if you're buying a car or something, other dealerships, or look online for other prices of that car. Find the manufacturer's suggested retail price. So what we're really looking at here is this this analysis of things can get a little bit more complicated than just having to look at them or add them up in your head. You don't necessarily need a calculator, but here you're probably going to need a calculator, and you're going to want to add this up. And that's part of what critical thinking is. It's looking at what's really going on here. What are the real numbers? Because we have a definitive number here. So we're going to do another slightly more complicated example of this just to show something different. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at one more problem here that's going to be a little bit more complex. And I've added our definitions of critical thinking to the spreadsheet here, and let's go over those one more time. Critical thinking is the disciplined process of analyzing arguments, identifying assumptions, and evaluating reasoning to reach logically sound, evidence-based conclusions. So our evidence here are these sums that we've come up with to compare the different paths to each other. Critical thinking, it's the skill of cutting through noise, clarifying ambiguity, questioning what others overlook, and structuring thought so decisions aren't built on illusion. And in plain terms, critical thinking means not letting BS or nonsense slip by just because it sounds good. It's about seeing clearly when everyone else is guessing. So to look at our final example here, we can see that this one is more complicated, and we're going to imagine that Francine is jumping on some sort of magical pads here that do magical things to the kibble. So on this one, the kibble gets multiplied by 2, and this one multiplied by 3. And so on and so forth. So I've already done the calculations of this, but if we were starting from scratch here with just these numbers in yellow, we would then have to apply these rules to come up with the actual numbers that we need to add up. So let's imagine instead of the cat problem here that this is you're buying a car and you're financing it, or you're signing some sort of a contract, and it might have, these are the surcharges, this is the interest rate, these are the taxes, here's this fee, here's that fee. You want to be able to look at all of these things and not only add them up, but understand them, because maybe you want to negotiate one of these rules, right? And so if you don't even know what the rules are, you might have to reverse engineer this because they might not tell you in a real contract. But if you want to know what the rules are, you might have to figure those out and figure out how that you would negotiate back against maybe just one of these rules, right? Maybe you'd be like, well, can we get rid of this one that divides by 2? And so looking at the example right here, I've already done the calculations, but still just looking at it, it's not something that's real easy to add up just by looking at it. So which one is the optimized path here? Let's have a look. And what we can see here is this one adds up to 56. So this one actually is the optimized path, beating this one out by 1 piece of kibble. So once again, the point here isn't to necessarily doing math problems, but math problems may very well be what you need to do to figure some of these things out. And they may not be that difficult. You may just need to go through, look at everything carefully, and do the problem. So I hope that this gave an example of differing levels of complexity with some different critical thinking problems. Obviously, they could involve a lot more than just numbers. It could be a legal document and be entirely text. So in that case, you're going to be looking for wording, and it could be some sort of finance document or business document that's a combination of wording and numbers, or it could be something so simple as what we talked about earlier with the soap or with the cereal, looking at price per unit. And so that is what we are going to cover today in this critical thinking session, and I hope that you got something out of it. Thank you for watching.
Let's take a look at the world with a critical eye.